days of COVID-19, when we all moved into lockdown, I began to notice a big disjunct between my social media, where my timeline was filled with stories of the troubles and understandable difficulties of homeschooling children, and my Zoom conversations with colleagues, where the same preoccupations were largely in evidence, with my personal email box. Over the weeks, in my email box, I had a steady stream, which continues to this day, of mail from women that I had interviewed or that I had briefly met when researching the book. These women were childless not by choice. And for them, the lockdown and COVID-19 posed a very different problem. They felt isolated, alone, lonely, often bored, with long hours to fill and with nothing to think about, but a loss that they were only just starting to get used to. They felt disregarded by the media, and they felt very alone and very forgotten. Stories of care homes and the tragedies unfolding within them resonated particularly with childless people, because having no descendants made them feel that this was very likely to be where they ended up. And yet the stories in the media about care homes almost always focused on these poor individuals as being mothers or fathers or grandparents. I'm taking this opportunity to read from my book Childless Voices, which was partly an exploration of my own struggles with infertility and my own coming to terms with it, as well as accounts of women all over the world and how their experience of not being able to have a child or of longing for a child compares with experience of women in other countries. I'm going to begin by reading about Bhakti and the story of her daughter. Then, through the most tenuous connection with India, a woman wrote to me. It was the most unlikely of links, a passing mention from someone I had once worked with to a relative, to a friend of their cousin. Bhakti was accompanied by her son on Skype. I can't speak Hindi, so he had offered to translate for us. A tiny Indian lady in a cream sari, accompanied by a moustached man in an immaculate suit, appeared on my screen. Ravi spoke perfectly enunciated English and began the introduction by making a slight bow. I insisted he didn't call me Dr. Gibb and then regretted it because he immediately looked uncomfortable with the informality of using my first name. Bhakti began her story in a rush of sounds, incomprehensible to me, but I could see the emotion on her face. Her daughter, Sur, made a love match with a boy she had known since childhood. Lakshman was 2 years older, from a neighbouring village, and with the approval of both sets of parents, they married when Sur was 21. We liked her husband's family, Ravi translated for me. They were good people and close by. So when Sur moved in to live with them, we were happy because we knew that we might still see her from time to time. At first, they were good in-laws too. Yes, it was a traditional house, but Sur told us she was happy that she shared the work with Lakshman's mother and didn't suffer in the way that some of her contemporaries did. Bhakti's face crumpled a little, her voice wavered, and Ravi, solicitous, turned to her and placed his hand on her arm. I was touched by his care and gave a sympathetic half smile. Bhakti smiled back, a beaming grin that seemed at odds with all the emotion I had heard. She spoke to Ravi, and he too smiled. She says she's happy that you want to know her story. It's been a few years since Sur died, but we don't want to forget her. Perhaps your book will make people think about her for a few minutes." "Sorry," he paused. "I was just saying to Mum that what she said wouldn't help with your story, but she insisted. She wants you to know that her daughter loved to sing. Will you call her Sue in your book?" I said of course I would. After a year, the family started asking why there was no child. This was a common situation, one I'd heard again and again from various women in the different countries. Sometimes the grace period was as long as 2 or 3 years, but the pattern seemed to be the same. If a couple had not made a baby, then either they weren't trying hard enough or there was something wrong with the wife. Lakshman's family reacted differently from many others though. They organised a break for the couple, 4 days in a region that was famed for its beauty, so they might have time to relax in each other's company. The intention was very clear. Free from domestic and work responsibilities, they would have lots of sex, and the child would be sure to appear. Bhakti described these days as the last time that her daughter was truly happy. When she returned, she too seemed sure she was pregnant, and when her usually regular period was late, she immediately shared the news with her family. But a week later, she began to bleed, and Lakshman, the gentle man whom she had loved since childhood, hit her for the first time. She didn't tell Bhakti, not then, but later, after there had been several more slaps and she had a cut on her arm from where one of his rings had broken her skin. "My sister didn't blame Lakshman, you know. She just hated herself. She did grow to hate his parents though, because they were always getting at her, mocking her, saying she was like a parched land. Sur was sure that Lakshman hit her because his parents expected him to do so. My sister was 10 years older than me. Now I'm the age she was then, but unlike her, I've been to university. It's inconceivable to me that no one thought there was a medical problem with Lakshman." Sur's in-laws sent her to doctors and clinics who said simply give it time. To Bhakti's knowledge, no one suggested that Lakshman was tested. When 3 years had passed, his family took a different approach. Sur's in-laws arranged for her and Lakshman to travel to the Gajapati district in the state of Odisha. In this place, there's a canon. It's old, and many local Hindus believe it's a fertility shrine. The canon was installed by the British Army in 1840 and is half buried on a hill surrounded by thick forest, shaded by the fern-shaped leaves of neem trees. There isn't a temple or even a shrine, but when I was there, I watched dozens of locals follow the narrow, winding path that has been cleared through the trees, carrying coconuts, bananas, and incense to gather round the canon and say prayers. Immersed in the heady scent of the burning sticks and the chattering cries and songs of birds, I imagined Sur and Lakshman, who came during the Hindu month of Chaitra, when the canon becomes a place of pilgrimage for the childless rather than just an auspicious site. The hopeful believe that by pouring milk into a small hole at the top of the canon, a child may be conceived. Sur and Lakshman followed this path through the dense, vibrant, living, cacophonous green, carrying some milk in a bottle or jar. I assume it was Sur who poured the milk into the canon. After all, they both believed it was she who was in some way cursed. I wonder how they felt when they left. Hopeful for a child, yes, but did Sur also think longingly of the ease and love of her relationship before all this futility of their trying? Was her prayer, her puja, that her husband would love her again once a child was born? Ravi said that Sur returned shining from the shrine. Bhakti nodded as if she understood and then spoke quickly to her son, almost interrupting him. It didn't last though, not even a day and a night. Her period started the evening after she arrived home. Ravi was matter of fact. He's a businessman and probably felt awkward discussing his sister's menstrual cycle, yet he related each part of the story unflinchingly, even gracefully. with a careful, almost old-fashioned formality. The narrative seemed to have a momentum of its own. I knew the sad outcome because the person who had put us in touch had intimated it to me, but I hadn't discussed it with Bhakti or Ravi. I didn't even know if they knew that I was aware of it. Instead, they recounted events as they unfolded, tales of beatings and abuse heard from neighbours and relatives who lived in the same village as Sura and Laxman, because Sura no longer came to visit her own family. And when they tried to see her, they were turned away. But there were rumours, stories of a bruised eye that took over a week to turn yellow, and of shouting in the evening. No one did anything. She was barren. It was awful for Lakshman's family. If there was sympathy, it was mostly for them, not for the woman whose failure to conceive had brought this upon herself. Between the two villages there is dense tangled forest, very similar to the area around the cannon, and here too there are neems, those hardiest of trees that need little water to survive and only lose their leaves in the very worst of droughts. Late one night, just over 4 months after they returned from offering milk to the cannon, after 4 cycles of disappointment, Sura climbed up on a neem tree on the edge of the woods with a length of rope. In the morning, as the village came to life, they found her hanging there, dressed in a pale blue sari, her bodily fluids already dried on the ground beneath her. Bhakti lost her composure as she described that last faithful scene, weeping softly, but Ravi did not. He spoke almost in anger. I had been haunted by the women of the newspaper reports, had dreamt more than once of their falling and their burning. Now I felt in this sad, slow recounting over a broadband connection that I had known one of them, Sur, the girl who liked to sing, who loved and married her childhood sweetheart, and who took her life because she couldn't have a baby of her own. But it wasn't the end of our conversation. From the folds of her sari, Bhakti produced a photograph and held it up. A girl in a red silk wedding sari smiled at me. Ravi said, "My sister." And then he added, "For us, you know, suicide is not just despair. She will have hoped that in the next life she would be fertile, have many babies."